Hi, Internet. I'm Kim.
And I'm Adam.
And we are
Kim and Adam.
So, for those of you who don't know, back in 2021, we both applied to be writers on the official Paramount Plus reboot for Frasier. Spoiler alert, we were ghosted. You can check out some of our other videos explaining how we got into that situation, and you can also see a visual mock-up of the material we officially submitted to Paramount when we were going through that application process. So we officially watched the reboot and we noticed some similarities.
To say the least.
Yeah, so we decided that we wanted to do a side-by-side comparison of the material that we created and officially sent to Paramount versus the material that they created and officially aired on Paramount Plus. So that's what we're doing now. We really want your feedback. We really want your opinion. Did they rip us off? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Okay, so we are officially going to be starting our side-by-side comparison of what we sent to Paramount Plus when we applied to be writers versus what was actually aired on the Frasier reboot that we applied for. So the left-hand side is going to be showing you the content that was officially aired on Paramount Plus for the Frasier reboot. The right-hand side is going to be showing you the content and some visual mock-ups just to represent that content that we did officially send to Paramount Plus back in 2021, again, when we officially applied to be writers for this franchise, and then we're completely ghosted. So I just want to kind of start by saying that, you know, the actual storylines for what we wrote versus what was aired were different. They were definitely very different, but we did notice some rather interesting similarities and just some flat out sames that we just have to break down and talk about. Although the concepts of the reboot versus our storylines are very different, we did feel that the material that we sent to Paramount Plus absolutely had an overall influence on their story and just the vibe of at least of the first two episodes that we watched. Adam said it, you don't have to use someone's words to capture their vibe or to copy them. So we kind of feel that that's maybe what happened here, and we're really looking to get some insight and some feedback and get some other opinions too. But again, we have full visual mock-ups for 2 of the 4 scripts that we submitted. Those are available on this channel. So if you want to see this content, please check those videos out and please watch the content that is available now on Paramount Plus so you can compare and form your own opinion. All right, so we're going to go ahead and unpack these similarities here. So again, we didn't go through all of them. We're just going through the major themes that we noticed, and we are going to do our best to kind of start at the beginning of the episode and work our way down, but we do want to let everyone know that this is going to have some major spoilers, so if you haven't watched the show, you can definitely back up now because we are going to expose some of the storylines and, you know, maybe some of the surprises on that show. So, okay, let's start. So the first thing that we noticed was definitely a small significance that happened right at the beginning of the episode, but it held a major impact for me, at least. And that is the skyline. So on the left here, you see what Paramount officially released on their network. The right is our visual mock-up of our material. So on the left-hand side, you see Frasier coming back to Boston. He is in the airport just getting off his plane. He has a moment where he sees a poster in the airport of the Boston skyline where it has a little tagline, "Boston's calling, are you listening?" And then Frasier has a moment where he looks up at that skyline and then he kind of makes a little face to himself and he keeps going. That was a very small moment, but it was a very significant moment for us as writers because we wrote a scene in our version of Frasier where he returned to Seattle versus returning to Boston. And the first stop he makes in Seattle is at his father's home. That's Ronnie and Martin's apartment, and Martin is now passed. So there was this sweet moment that we wrote into this scene where Frasier comes into Ronnie's apartment. He looks out over the Seattle skyline, and he says this line to himself, "Hello again, my old friend." And, we really put a lot of thought and meaning into everything we wrote and every decision that we made. There was a lot of significance behind our choices. And if you go watch our mock-up version of the reboot, we really go into that in detail. But seeing Frasier have a moment looking out over the city skyline and then having that little to himself, we definitely noticed that coincidence, and that was right off the bat. So moving on. All right, so the reboot wrote essentially that Frasier, for the last 20 years, has become a very rich and famous TV personality while living in Chicago. He went to Chicago at the end of the series in the original Frasier, and that's where they put him, was in Chicago. He became super famous to the point where people recognize him.
It's TV's Frasier Crane! Yeah.
And that's what he's been up to, is accruing fame and fortune, and now he's basically like a household name. Where he is in this episode is he is moving to Paris to research material for a book that he's writing, and he ends up reconnecting with his old friends and family and ends up staying in Boston permanently. So that was the storyline that they went with, which was really interesting because our storyline that we wrote for Frasier was basically an inverted version of that. We wrote that Frasier didn't move to Chicago. He actually moved to San Francisco. And while he was in San Francisco, he went into private practice and he became a successful writer. So he became a very well-distinguished writer. He wrote 3 books in 5 years, and he was recently added to the New York Times bestsellers list. So we wrote that Frasier returned to Seattle after the death of his father, Martin. And we're going to talk more about that later. But just to continue with this train of thought, once Frasier returns to Seattle, he reconnects with his old family and friends, but his family is more so on Niall's side of the family versus his son. But what was interesting is we wrote that Roz is a very powerful executive producer at a local TV station in Seattle, and she produces a very famous talk show. It's like a morning talk show in Seattle, and she offers Frasier a job to host his own segment on that show. She literally says the line, "I can make you famous like that." So we thought it was really interesting that they went with the angle of Frasier being a famous TV personality, because our story outlined the journey of him becoming a famous TV host once he returned to Seattle. So it was a pretty interesting take that in their version, he was a successful TV star who's on his journey to become a writer, when we literally wrote that he was a successful, esteemed, award-winning writer who is now on the journey of becoming a famous television personality. So it's really weird. It's like they literally took those backstories and just flip-flopped them. All right, so now we are going to talk about Martin's funeral. So for those of you who don't know, John Mahoney, who was the actor who played Frasier's father on the original show, he did pass away in 2018. And that is something that, you know, it makes sense that they would have to address it just because of the reality of the situation. So really here, we're not going to bring up too much faults or too much, you know, we're not going to take too much of a bite here because it's a very sad and real reality that you would have to face, because Martin was a very, very important part of that franchise. He had a huge impact on the show and the fan base. So I feel like not addressing his loss would just be in poor taste. So on the Paramount version, Frasier returns to Boston after the funeral of his father. He's upset because Freddie did not attend the funeral. And that episode kind of centers around Freddie, you know, reconnecting with his dad and them working out their differences and their past issues, right? So our episode basically focused on Martin's funeral. That was the central theme. Frasier came back to Seattle because his father recently died, and that's where we're starting the story from, is Frasier reconnecting with his friends and family, i.e. Niles and Roz and some other core characters. We did not write Freddie being in the funeral either, but we had our own reasons for doing that we did not disclose to Paramount Plus, because we were hoping that we would get hired on this show and we could potentially use that material down the line later in the season and have Freddie reconnect in a different way. But for this episode, we really wanted to honor John Mahoney. We wrote some really nice material honoring his legacy. There were also some really nice scenes that outline and define grief, reconciliation, and what self-worth means to us as individuals. Again, we really tried to put a lot of substance into what we were writing. And again, we didn't want to be too critical here of this comparison because of John Mahoney's passing in real life. You know, that's something that was obvious and a very true element that had to be addressed. And it very much was addressed in this episode. We just did ours differently. But a similarity is a similarity, and Martin's funeral was definitely a recurring theme throughout that episode. And it was also the central theme in ours. So, yeah, like for like. All right, so this next comparison here was definitely way more obvious to us when we looked at these two different storylines and we looked at these two different just archetypes. It was very, very evident that our material was a huge influence in this scene, especially. So here on the left, we see the Paramount Plus material, and you see Frasier sitting in a bar with Olivia, who is the head of the education department or whatever at Harvard.
Who's that?
That's our department head, Olivia Finch. Brilliant scholar, but an absolute terror.
She basically is like a domineering girl boss. She offers Frasier a job being a guest teacher there at Harvard. He's initially reluctant to it, says no. She's very persistent. She's very headstrong.
The next best thing would be to have you teach here permanently.
That is a tempting offer.
So it's a yes.
But I have plans in Paris.
So it's a maybe.
I leave in the morning.
So it's a soft maybe.
She continuously pesters him until he eventually accepts the position, and he officially moves to Boston to become a teacher or professor. So that is really similar to what we wrote about Roz. We again wrote that Roz is a very powerful executive who runs a really famous morning talk show in Seattle. She reunites with Frasier at Martin's funeral, and she offers Frasier his own segment on her show. He is really hesitant to the idea and initially turns her down, but after she is persistent and pushes him, he, takes some time to reevaluate his life. And after being hounded by Roz, he eventually accepts the position and he moves back to Seattle. So, these similarities are very, very clear. You have the strong female boss archetype who is driven by success. She strives to have Frasier be a guest spot in her organization. That's going to help boost her ratings, her notoriety, and make her money.
He would be such an asset to our department. He would draw more students, which would mean more funding, which would set me on track to being provost 1 year younger than my sister became provost at Yale.
Frasier is initially resistant to the thought of moving into this new career path, but after spending time with his old friends, after spending time connecting with his family, who he hasn't seen in a long time, he reprioritizes his goals. He eventually accepts the job and then relocates. Wow. Wow. All right, so the next comparison we're going to bring up here is the fancy dinner. So as you can see here on the left on the Paramount Plus show, Frasier shows up unexpectedly at Freddie's house with a bag of food, and he offers to cook him this really nice fancy dinner. The fancy dinner is interrupted, and he actually doesn't get to eat it after all. What we wrote was that Frasier was going to babysit Niles and Daphne's kids while they were away for the weekend. And while they were away, you guessed it, he was going to cook them a fancy dinner that was interrupted, and he actually didn't get to eat it. So this is what they made in the Frasier reboot.
Now, I have a Kagoshima A5, decadently marbled, bursting with umami in a retro-nasal symphony. Steaks! I have steaks!
And this is what we made in our material. Pizza!
Oh no, little Johnny. There will be no pizza tonight. I've made Uncle Frasier's famous duck à l'orange with a side of chou farci and for dessert creme brulee.
Ew, you cooked a duck?
Yes, pizza! It's okay, we'll order pizza. Everything's alright, see?
So pretty similar, especially in just kind of the theme, overall vibe, and I personally think the inflection of the delivery, but yeah, interesting. This next piece here again, we thought was a pretty bold comparison. That's the messy apartment. So Frasier, on the reboot, Frasier comes over to Freddy's apartment, and when he initially looks around, he starts sneering and kind of critiquing his home for kind of being disheveled and not having a lot of money. So we wrote the messy apartment a few different ways. We wrote that Frasier, when he first arrived at Ronnie and Martin's apartment, that when he looked around her place, he was kind of snobby, made his little critiques because it was cluttered with stuff everywhere. But we wrote that in not to like dog anyone for their wages. We did that to basically showcase how Ronnie was this older woman who was now alone. She just lost her husband, so her home is kind of like a representation of her life. It's just cluttered. And we also wrote that in to set up this really nice moment later between Frasier and Niles. So again, we had purpose for our decisions that we made. And on the Frasier reboot, it's revealed later in the episode that Freddie is actually hiding from Frasier the fact that a baby lives with him in his apartment. So now that Frasier is aware that there's a baby living in this space, they then fill up that space with kids stuff. And it gets really cluttered and it gets really messy, and the kids stuff just takes over and becomes really cluttered and messy, which is exactly what happened to Niles and his family. So we wrote that Niles has children and he's a parent. And when Frasier comes over to visit Niles unexpected one morning, it catches Niles off guard. Frasier comes in and sees how cluttered his house is with kid stuff and how the kids are just kind of taken over and running amok. So we thought that was a huge similarity for a few different reasons between our material and their material. Okay, so this next comparison here, pretty bold in my opinion. Kind of hard to dismiss this one. So here on the left, you can see that they have incorporated into their storyline a newborn baby. It's revealed that Freddie's roommate is a single mom and her infant son is named John, which I'm assuming is a nod to John Mahoney, because that is the exact thing that we wrote in our storyline. Except we didn't call our baby John. We called him Johnny. And he wasn't a baby. He was more like a pre-K kid. We wrote that Niles and Daphne have 4 children. In the original show, Frasier, they had 2 children, so we decided to give them 2 more, and Johnny is the youngest. He was basically designed to be the Dennis the Menace little kid who's just that cute little ragamuffin. So we thought it was interesting that they went with the dynamic of Freddie's roommate's baby instead of Niles and his children. But we did think it was interesting that this character ended up having 4 children.
You see, this is why I don't have children.
You have 4.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Coincidence.
So what do we do about John?
Right, the baby.
But we were really shocked by this one. We were like, dude, seriously? Like, we wrote Johnny in specifically as a way to honor John Mahoney's memory and his character and what his character represented in the series. Did have a lot of thought and meaning into it, which, again, we go into a little bit deeper in our actual reboot videos. But yeah, that one we were totally shocked by. Like, really, dude? Wow. Okay, so this next one we thought was a pretty obvious comparison as well, which is the tired, burnt out parent storyline. So in the Frasier reboot, after it is revealed about baby Johnny, Freddie now can live freely with like all the baby stuff everywhere, spread out all over the apartment. And there's this funny moment where everyone keeps tripping over like kids' toys and like kids' stuff. And Freddie and Eve are just clearly overwhelmed by the responsibilities of parenthood. Well, what we wrote in episode 2 is, again, Niles is a father of 4. But instead of Freddie being the one who's run down, it's Niles who's run down, burnt out, and basically just crushed by the responsibilities of parenthood. Yeah, so Niles, we wrote that his home is just cluttered with kid stuff, and little Johnny runs by to shoot him in the face with a Nerf gun. So instead of him, triggering this little dancing chair, we went with a bigger laugh, like, pew, pew. And then he runs away kind of thing, and Niles is just like, like, unfazed by it. So, yeah, so that was pretty surprising that they went with that angle. But this next one is just, it just really is kind of undeniable. So on the left here, you see on the reboot that Freddie and Eve are, again, they're tripping over kids' toys. There's like this little chair next to him that plays music, and it keeps going off and like startling him. And once it goes off, after a certain point, he just kind of reacts and he grabs the nearest item next to him, which is just like this baseball bat. And then he just like hits the thing with a baseball bat to stop the sound. Well, that is literally the same exact scenario that we wrote in our Frasier reboot, only we wrote that experience for Frasier. So we wrote that Frasier, again, he's at Niles' house. He shows up unexpected. He's really surprised by all the clutter that's there, all the kid stuff that's there. And while he's there, kind of taking in the scene, he hears this little like scurry across the floor, and he screams. He kind of has this big reaction, and then he grabs the closest item to him, which, you guessed it, happens to be a baseball bat. But our baseball bat was more like a kid's baseball bat. It was going to be like one of those big kind of clown inflatable like baseball bats that like a 5-year-old would play with. And we really wanted to go for the big laugh where he takes the inflatable bat. He's trying to hit the rodents on the ground, and the bat's like squeaking and stuff, and he's having his like big drama queen moment. And instead of him being attacked by Baby Shark, he was being attacked by ferrets. But he wasn't really being attacked at all. These little cute ferrets just happen to run by the room and startle him. And the ferrets are pets of Jody. Jody is one of Niles' children, and she runs in to scoop up the pets and save them from being stomped by Frasier. So Jody runs in announcing the name of her ferrets. And her ferrets are named Moose and Enzo, which was a nice little Easter egg we wrote in because the dogs who played Eddie in the original series were named Moose and Enzo. So we thought that was a cute little sprinkle, but we also thought it was pretty interesting that they also used the name Moose as a character name in the reboot.
I don't think I said that, Moose.
No, I remember because it really broke my heart.
So this guy here is one of Freddy's like firefighter buddies, and his name is Moose. So interesting. Coincidence or because again, we sent in a lot of material. Not only did we send in scripts, but we sent in some outlines and some kind of introductions and reasonings, again, as to why we made these decisions, because we did put a lot of thought into this. So we were kind of surprised when we saw that, because that was, something we intentionally named those pets. So, all right. So next down the line, we have moving day. So here we have Frasier moving back to Boston. And he ends up buying the apartment across the hall from Freddie. And here you can see that he has like boxes everywhere and he's moving his stuff in. And that is at the end of episode 1. So what we wrote for the end of our episode 1 was actually the tossed salad and scrambled eggs number. He had moved back to Seattle. And while the song was playing, he was unpacking all these boxes in his new apartment. And we wanted to do this tasteful shot where he put Martin and Eddie's picture next to each other on the shelf. There was also a moment that we wrote where Frasier and Niles were going through boxes in Ronnie's apartment as a way to just kind of like reminisce about Martin and his death. So we thought, oh wow, like the apartment kind of cluttered with boxes. We were like, yeah, that's definitely a theme that we wrote. And so we're gonna close up shop with this one here. This one just hurt. So I don't really have any other way to say that. So at this point in our experience watching this material, once we got to this point in the content, I felt like I wanted to jump out of my skin. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I knew it wasn't happenstance. I was like, holy cow. Slap me in the face, why don't you? Because that's literally what it felt like. So as soon as I saw this title card, I was like, what? So the name of this title card is From the Highlands of the Sunshine State. So hello, Sunshine State, Florida, that's where we're from. And Highland County is a county right outside of Central Florida, which is where we live. So as soon as we saw that, we were like, what? And I mean, this next scene here, he just said it.
Still in Orlando.
I mean, what else can you say? I think Mr. Crane just said it right there. This was distilled in Orlando. So there was this moment where they're drinking this like really cheap scotch, and then Frasier is like critiquing the scotch. He looks at the label, and then he's like, ew, it was distilled in Orlando, and then makes that little quip. And so when I saw that like spiritually like sucker punched me in the gut. That's what it felt like, because for those of you who don't know, we're from Orlando. We grew up here. We have lived here almost our entire lives. And they knew that when we went into this interview process. And there was even a little quip that we wrote in the script about Ronnie going to Orlando because we wanted to name drop the town that we're from, because we have a lot of pride and love where we live. So we were really, really surprised that that happened, because it's, in my opinion, I think the themes between the material that we created and the material that they presented are very similar, too similar to be a coincidence. And then you're gonna name drop my state and my city as a joke, like a butt of the joke. Like, dude, cut a horse head off and throw it in my bed, why don't you? It's like, ouch. Like, seriously, was that really necessary? So I think it's a really, really just crazy situation that we have found ourselves in. Even crazier that this happened, considering that when we sent the material to Paramount initially, we did put like a disclosure on the bottom of all of our material that you can see right here that said, please don't use this without our consent, because it's bad karma. And it is. And as you can see right here, Chris sent us a message during our communication stating that he's not even allowed, like, he's legally not even allowed to view Frasier content. And he said that he didn't open it. He said he was deleting it right away. So can someone please explain to me how I provided you with deleted content that now rings parallel in the content that was presented on your network? That's where I'm going to end it. So that was it. Thank you so much for watching. It really means so much to us that you took the time to check out our art. So what you just saw were only some of the larger coincidences that we noticed through the comparison of our material and the material that Paramount Plus aired for their Frasier reboot. So there were definitely a lot more smaller coincidences that we noticed that we're going to actually be discussing over our TikTok channel and social media sites. So if you're interested in that, definitely like and subscribe and follow, because we're gonna talk about this and we got a lot more to discuss. So also remember that what we have posted on our channel is only 2 of the 4 original scripts that we sent Paramount Plus during our application process. They currently are scheduled for 8 more episodes on Paramount Plus. So we will definitely be watching, and we will definitely be staying tuned to see what else they ripped off from our material. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. We really, really, really appreciate your time. Peace, love, and punk, y'all.